Hello, biology students. We kind of left off partway through our process of photosynthesis. So just for a quick review, we did talk about what photosynthesis was, the structure of those chloroplasts, and then we said there's actually a couple of phases, different steps that we break photosynthesis into, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. And we talked about the light-dependent reactions already in the last video, so make sure that you understand that and have an understanding of that. Also, it is the expectation when you watch these videos as I go through the notes, just like if you were in class, the expectation is that you are writing these things down in your notebooks to be handed in at the time of the test. Those are points for you. There's reasons why we do that. First of all, there's just a lot of studies that indicate that if you write things down, not type it up, write with pen or pencil, that there's a much higher rate of retention of material. So it is important for you to write this down. You can, I go pretty fast through here. You can pause this video as many times as you need to. It's a 15-minute video. If you were in class, we'd have 46 minutes. So make sure that you are doing that. That's really important. So we talked about photosystem just a little bit. It's the photosystem, there's photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. A photosystem is just a bunch of chlorophyll molecules linked together, and then some carrier molecules and so forth. The first photosystem we really talk about is photosystem 2. So photosystem 2 really happens first, and so it seems a little backwards, but photosystem 2 actually captures sunlight from sunlight energy. It excites those electrons. They get very excited, and a series of reactions occur, and then it feeds, photosystem 2 feeds excited electrons into photosystem 1, where some of those intermediary molecules are going to be made. The reason photosystem 2 comes after photosystem, or before photosystem 1, is just because photosystem 1 was discovered first and was named first, and then they're like, oh, this whole other photosystem that's super important, that has a really big job like capturing sunlight's energy, this photosystem 2 was discovered second. So I would say life on this planet, animals and all the things that depend on plants, would be, we better be super thankful for photosystem 2, people. So that was our quick overview of those light-dependent reactions, but what I really want to cover in this video are the light-independent reactions. So light-independent reactions, they used to be called dark reactions a little more commonly. We really don't call them that anymore, but if you ever hear that, they're talking about the same thing. If we call them dark reactions, it kind of indicates that they have to happen at night or in the dark, and that's really not true. They're just not dependent on light, but they still might be happening during the day, and often are. So light-independent reactions are the reactions that form organic compounds by using energy stored during the light-dependent reactions in the bonds of this NADPH and also some ATP. These are not dependent on light. That's why we call them light-independent reactions. And we're going to talk about, really the bulk of it is something called the carbon fixation by Calvin cycle. And the Calvin cycle is just that chemical process that converts CO2 into glucose. We refer to this as carbon fixing, but really, so when we talk about chemistry, things are not, like atoms are never like destroyed or go away in typical chemical reactions, but they're converted from one form to another. So in the case of when glucose is made, where does that carbon has to come from? Somewhere else. So what it actually comes from is this CO2 that plants have taken in through those stomata. So I like this diagram because it shows kind of the light reactions or light dependent reactions that are occurring with, water being split. And I know in your lesson, when you complete your lesson, Apex lesson, it kind of goes through the steps individually of each of those. But we get a little ATP made, we get a little NADPH. Those are energy storage. But these light reactions you see dependent on light. And then here's the Calvin cycle. So things feed into this Calvin cycle. And this is where you can see carbon dioxide enters this cycle, and that carbon is converted to glucose. So that's the organic molecule that is the output of that cycle. So then an overview of that Calvin cycle, and we also say carbon fixation. We're not fixing anything that's broken. Carbon fixation simply means converting carbon dioxide into something else, or it's changing carbon from one molecule to another. So we're fixing the carbon into something that's a little more useful than carbon dioxide. So it enters as carbon dioxide, and we begin to build carbon molecules. So we first build some PGA molecules from carbon dioxide. We get some ATP has to power a process here that it fuels this process. So the ATP, which is the energy molecule for the cell, because some of that is used up in making this molecule, now it bumps back down to ADP. We also have NADPH, which carries a bunch of energy. See how it's all like energized? That's why it's drawn like this. We use the power from that, which then bumps this down in energy. So this energy came from photosystem 2, from those light dependent reactions. And now we have more of these carbon molecules made. We continue to move through this cycle until the final output then is we're going to have a 6-carbon molecule of glucose. As we move through all of these steps. So this G3P is transported from the chloroplast to actually make glucose. The formula for glucose, we really are talking about a conversion process. So carbon fixation literally means we're converting that carbon from CO2 to glucose. And so you can see there's only one carbon. CO2 means one carbon and 2 oxygen in carbon dioxide. But glucose has 6 carbon. So obviously it's going to take 6 of these to actually produce 1 molecule of glucose. Okay, so this fixes a lot of carbon from carbon dioxide, which is good for us because carbon dioxide is what we exhale. We don't need any more of that. So this is where plants in that process actually give off, they use up that carbon dioxide and they give off some oxygen in the process. So as much as I would love to say every plant does this exactly the same way and the process doesn't change at all from one type of plant to another, but that's really not the case. We actually have some specialized pathways. So there's a couple of other carbon fixing pathways that some plants have, but not all plants do. So plants have developed some pretty incredible adaptations in different climates, just purely as a survival mechanism. So one of the things that we see, I'm going to move this over just a little bit. One of the things that we see is something called the C4 pathway. This is a carbon fixing pathway in which carbon dioxide is bound to a compound to form a 4-carbon intermediate molecule. Remember, all the ones we talked about in that last step were these 3-carbon molecules. But there's a special little mechanism in some plants that allows them to build a 4-carbon kind of intermediate, like partway there kind of molecule before it goes into the carbon cycle. This is only found in plants that grow in high temperatures and really high sunlight, like grasses and corn, which is a grass originally found in the Middle Americas by Native Americans. So corn is one of those special kind of, that has the C4 pathway. So this just allows them to be really, really efficient and fix carbon at a much higher rate. So what a great adaptation to have when you are in an area where there's just lots and lots of sunlight. The other one is the CAM pathway. This is pretty fascinating because we're talking about desert plants. So plants that grow in really hot and dry climates where there's not a lot of water. So water becomes very, very precious. They have to be very careful not to lose the little bit of water that they have. So dry climates, this allows plants to take in CO2 at night. Remember we talked about the structure of plants. This is my plant. These are whoops, I don't want to have a flower, I want to have a leafy plant. This is why I'm not an art teacher, everyone. This is why. All right, so we said we have these stomata kind of pores in here. These pores can open and close, and we definitely need to take in some CO2 in through these pores. Then we also remember the oxygen gas, which we're all about oxygen gas, so that's the great benefit that another great benefit that we get from plants. First of all, we get to eat them, and we get all of the glucose that they've made, and so forth. But we also, reap the benefits of oxygen being given off. But the other, and this is the kind of tough part, when these stomata have to be open for that gas exchange to occur, and when they're open, we also lose some water vapor, which if you're in an area where there's lots of water and it's raining all the time, that's really not a big deal. But if you're in the desert, this is kind of a problem. Maybe it only rains a couple times a year or 3 times a year or whatever. So if you're a plant out in the desert, you are very efficient at drawing in water. And then you really, really have to be conservative and keep the water that you have. So these desert plants with the CAM pathway allow plants to keep those stomata, so we say the pores, but we're really talking about stomata, closed during the hot part of the day to minimize water loss. Other really cool features of cactus and desert plants are they tend to be, so this is my cactus. They tend to be, and they have these spines. So the spines are really adapted leaves. Did you know that? So they're very, very tiny. So first of all, they don't have a lot of stomata to begin with because their leaves are super tiny. These little spines are actually the leaves. But then they also have this super cool, I don't know what color to draw this. If you ever look closely at a cactus, they have this waxy coating on the outside too. So this is a really fabulous adaptation if you are in somewhere that's really hot or doesn't have much water or both. So from an evolutionary standpoint, this CAM pathway was really important in order for plants to survive in that kind of environment. So I would like you to draw this and write this down. This is stuff we talked about. Plants do tend to have more stomata on the bottom side of the leaf where it's more shaded, just to kind of prevent that water loss as well. Things that affect the rate of photosynthesis, this is worth mentioning. So temperature actually does have a large effect. If it's too cold, photosynthesis slows way down. If there's not enough sunlight, obviously it slows down. pH can have an effect. Some plants adapt better to that than others. The level of carbon dioxide, more carbon dioxide is higher levels of photosynthesis. Water levels are important, and soil